Hey, APGov. So we're going to talk for just a moment here about one more of the factors that affects voter turnout in the United States and really in countries around the world. And so first, just a quick review. We know that voter turnout in the United States is pretty low compared to other nations around the world. We know that, especially compared to developed nations, the United States struggles to get a lot of people to vote. But the big question, of course, is why? What are the factors that either encourage voting or discourage voting or stop people from getting to the polls? And so, first, as a level of review, things that you have either read about or we have talked about in class, we know that demographics are a huge part of voting. We know that there are relationships between age, race, gender, income level, all of those things influence how likely it is someone is going to show up at the polls. We also talked earlier this week, and you guys researched a little bit on how certain restrictions or barriers to voting can stop people from voting. Even something as simple as having to register before you vote will be a barrier that stops some people from showing up because they'll show up to the polls and not realize that they had to register a month ago and then not be able to vote and not want to vote anymore. But the last issue is really about people's perception of the political system. And this certainly overlaps with ease of voting and definitely overlaps with demographics. How people feel about the electoral system has a lot to do with how people engage with the electoral system. So we're going to look at these two ideas, efficacy and salience, and how they connect to voter motivation. So political efficacy is whether or not people believe that the political system actually works. It's that big question about whether they think their vote matters. Is their vote going to change an election? Is their vote going to change a policy? Do they think that who gets elected is going to change anything about the way politics is done? When people feel like their vote actually has an impact on the policies that are enacted, then they are more likely to show up and vote. But when they feel like the vote doesn't matter, then they're more likely to disregard the election and not even try to have their voice heard. Similarly, issue salience is a related topic. This is about whether people think that the issues that are relevant in Washington, D.C., or being discussed by the government, even if it's the state government, are actually meaningful to them. So whether something is salient or not is whether it really affects you and has any personal meaning to you. And what we know is that the more likely or the more that people see issues as being important to them and affecting their lives, the more likely they are to actually show up at the polls, because then they are more likely to think that it matters that they're engaged. But when people don't think the issues matter, when the issues are abstract or hard to wrap your head around, or not things that you care about, then people disconnect from the election and disconnect from voting. So I want to show you just a little bit of data from Pew Research and other groups that again shows us what voters are thinking and gives you some examples of this. So here are some data points on things non-voters said about the 2020 election, right? First, the very first issue here is definitely a matter of issue salience, right? The issues in Washington don't affect me personally. Almost half of non-voters, 47% of non-voters agreed with that statement. These next three are all great examples of political efficacy. It doesn't matter who becomes the president, my vote doesn't matter, and my vote will not affect the real decisions. 66%, almost two-thirds of non-voters agreed with the statement that their vote wouldn't change the decisions in the country. So you can see very clearly why, in terms of efficacy, feeling like their vote is going to change anything, they wouldn't bother to show up. Similarly, right, more reasons for non-voting. 29% of non-voters in 2020 said it was because they weren't registered. That's your classic barrier to access. But look at how many voters said these other issues, which all fall under categories of efficacy and salience, or motivation and feeling like their vote matters. They're not interested, they don't like the candidates, they don't think their vote would make a difference. These are characteristics of groups of people that you'll sometimes hear as being disengaged or disaffected. The political system, for some reason or in some way, has turned them off to politics and to being a part of the political system in the United States. And that makes them way less likely to vote and way less likely to enact and or participate in any other number of ways. So, our big questions for this week and things you should be thinking about as you do some more research. Do you think it's possible for the United States to improve the political efficacy of its people? Are there ways that we could get in touch with these people who don't feel connected? And think really specifically about issues. Go back and look at some of the data. What in 2020 really mattered that got people motivated? What in 2016, when turnout was significantly lower, made people feel like they didn't want to participate? And where do these ideas of efficacy and saliency show up in the data and show up in what we know about people's choices in those elections?